welcome to Fiction Fans, a podcast where we read books and other words too. I'm Lily.
And I'm Sarah.
And thank you for joining us for 90 minutes of coughing directly into the microphone.
Not by me this time.
I know. And you actually won't hear any of that coughing because I will take it out in post, but trust me, it's happening.
Yes.
Well, Sarah, we're back. It's been like 3 years, I think, since we last recorded.
I was going to say 30, but 3 sounds right too.
Yeah. 3 years, 3 weeks, something like that. I was supposed to see you in person over that time. Instead, I became a plague bearer.
So I'm glad that we did not see each other in person since you were a plague bearer. That was the responsible thing to do, but that was kind of a bummer.
It was a bummer. Anyway, enough about that. Let's start the episode with something good that happened last year. Oh, this is our year in review episode. So we're just going to be sort of recapping some of the books we read on the podcast, some of the stats for those books, and at the end, we're going to do some rapid fire superlatives. But before that,
something great that happened last year. Well, obviously that has to be, I went to Antarctica. I have already talked about this in a recorded episode, but because you had the plague, I think it's an episode that we have not released yet. So this will not be the only time you hear me talk about Antarctica, but I'm not going to talk about it too much because you will hear me talk about it later. It was fantastic. Definitely the highlight of my 2022.
Wonderful. That's just a sneak peek for when you go into it in a little more detail in the past future, the future past.
At some point.
I was going to be maudlin and say my good thing is all of the booster shots I got because holy fuck, I do not know how I would have gotten through Christmas unvaccinated. Like if it was that bad,
yeah,
with vaccination and boosters, I don't know what would have happened.
Yeah, no, I feel you there. It was not fun when I had it in July. Ugh. And it did not sound like fun when you had it.
I'm being a little dramatic. We had like one of the oxygen meters and it never went down. Like I didn't have any of the actual dangerous symptoms. I was just asleep for 2 weeks.
I mean, in a way, isn't that really nice?
Except I never felt rested.
Yeah.
The nice thing about sleeping is having slept. I never really got there.
Yeah, I mean, I liked the not just opportunity, but like obligation to do nothing but sit in bed and read.
I watched all of Community, all of Futurama, and all of Arrested Development because those were all shows I've seen many times. So I could just sort of drift off into sleep whenever. I felt no obligation to be awake.
Right.
So it was like sort of a nice, oh, we're on this episode now? All right. But this is not Lily complains about COVID for 90 minutes, even though that's very likely what it will turn into.
Probably. Do you have a genuinely good thing?
I mean, it was a good year. Nothing was like particularly crazy good.
Yeah, but that's not the point of this question necessarily. I mean,
lots of good things happened, but if I have to pick one to talk about, I guess it was my 5-year anniversary.
That's a good thing.
I think my mother-in-law texted us to tell us that because we did not actually know. But that was nice. We got Thai food delivered because that's how we celebrate our anniversary.
A good way to celebrate. Mm-hmm. I want Thai food.
You're welcome. Anyway, lots of good things. I'll just be sappy and say that one. What are you drinking this lovely afternoon?
I am drinking a black tea, which is very nice. Although it's because we've been on the call for longer than we've actually been recording, it has gone a little cold, which is a little sad. And it's also mostly gone, but
we'll have to take a tea intermission sooner rather than later.
We will have to take a tea intermission. What are you drinking today?
I am drinking, I'm not actually sure how much I enjoy it, but there's so much tea in this house because Daniel and I have been sick for like 3 weeks and just like drinking tea like it's going out of style. But I found this green tea with turmeric, and those are both supposed to fight inflammation. I don't know if that's true, but it did feel very nice when I had a sore throat. And if you put enough honey in it, you don't have to taste the turmeric.
Do you have enough honey in it right now?
I do, yes.
Yeah, I think I've had a green tea with turmeric by like New Me or somebody. Is that the brand that you've had?
No, it's just Bigelow.
Oh.
It's not nice tea. When you're buying tea in the amount of bulk that I did, you don't go for the good stuff.
I disagree with you there because I buy tea in bulk, but I like to have nice tea because I like drinking nice tea.
I was just chugging hot water, basically, that had some flavor in it.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'd much care for green tea with turmeric either.
I love green tea, and I love green tea with honey. I don't hate it. I would obviously stop drinking it if I hated it.
Right.
I don't know if it's actually giving me any health benefits, but I mean,
it says
why
it
not,
is,
right?
So. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, green tea I love, but green tea with turmeric, maybe a little less so.
It's definitely more on the savory scale, and I do like savory green tea, but this one was a little spicier, maybe just than I expected. Maybe I'll try it again when I'm not just looking for comfort food, and I'll have a different reaction.
Yeah.
Well, we're about to talk quite a bit about what we've read recently and not so recently.
We are.
But Sarah, have you read anything good recently?
I'm going to say the last book that I read for 2022, which is also the last book that I've read, because I have not read anything this year thus far. But that was The Shepherd's Crown by Terry Pratchett. It is the last Discworld novel. It came out after he had passed away. And objectively, it's not his best book, but subjectively, it still made me bawl. So I'm going to say that. Like he finished the book, but he didn't complete it, if that makes sense. Like there's definitely bits where I think had he still been alive, he would have fine-tuned and expanded upon and things like that. There was an event in the book that I knew was going to happen, but I thought it was going to happen at the end, and it happens at the beginning within the first 30 pages. And I cry pretty easily at books, but it's not often that I am full on sobbing. And this book did that to me.
Good. Good. Yes, good.
Good.
I have not read jack shit.
I mean, you've got a pretty good excuse for just doing some no reading, mindless TV watching.
I've played quite a few video games as well, but that's not what this podcast is about, is it?
No, this podcast is about what we read in 2022. And on that note, I think we can talk about some of our reading stats, because I don't know about you, but I think it's interesting to look at the breakdown of what we read and how we read it.
Well, the answer that I have is yes, but I think you are asking the listeners.
I am asking the listener. I mean, if your answer was not yes, we probably would not be talking about it on the podcast.
I was the one who was like, let's do a comparison to 2021 as well. So
yes. So for 2022, we released 51 episodes total. In that, 48 episodes were specific to a book. We actually read 49 books because one episode we covered 2 books. That was our interview with R.B. Lemberg and Ada Hoffman. In 2021, we read 46 books, so did a little more reading this year, but not by much.
Oh, I think it's worth mentioning that our format changed. Instead of releasing one episode with 2 books in it, we caved and conformed to the rest of the world, because turns out everyone does it this way for a reason.
Yes, it makes a lot more sense to do it this way. And it makes it easier for you to edit.
Yes, and now we release 1 episode a week with 1 book per episode.
Yes, so that was a change from 2021 as well. We read still mostly fantasy. We read 23 fantasy books. That includes 9 Discworld books. But we doubled our sci-fi reading with 14 sci-fi books this year, as opposed to 7 in 2021. And a couple of other genres, like we had some urban fantasy, some thrillers, 2 mystery books, a humor book.
Which book is just humor?
That's Campaigns and Companions.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Yes, because I guess technically it's kind of fantasy. Campaigns and Companions by Andy Ewington and Brianna Pratchett. But it's really more of a humor book, kind of like a coffee table. Not really large enough to be a coffee table book, I don't think. But illustrations and short little D&D related, like your pets are playing D&D.
I would agree entirely that it belongs under the humor umbrella as far as our podcast reading stats go. But I don't think it's just kind of fantasy. It's definitely fantasy.
Yes, okay.
That's just not the dominant genre.
This is very true. Yes. But yeah, that is the book that I counted as humor for the sake of our statistics.
We read fewer Discworld books this year than we did last year.
We did, not by much, but by 2. So last year we read 11 Discworld books. This year it was only 9.
And I gotta say, that does kind of skew all of our demographic stats.
It does. I mean, because it means that 9 of our authors are Terry Pratchett.
Well, I guess it depends on how we're phrasing the question, right? Are we saying how many male authors did we read, or how many books by male authors did we read?
Yes. If it is male authors, we read 17? Yes, 17, because I can do math.
Wait, it says 18 on the page. What
I know, but 18 plus 9 is 27, which does not match up with that 26 number.
Oh.
So I think I did my math wrong there.
No, because you're counting Pratchett as 1.
Oh, yes.
He's still in there.
Yes, you are correct.
But as 1 person instead of 9 people.
Yes. Okay, so my math was correct the first time. Yeah, so 18 male authors, but 26 books by male authors, as opposed to 19 female authors and 19 books by female authors and 3 books by non-binary authors.
Wait, didn't we read 2 books by Essa Hansen? How can that be the same number?
Essa Hansen isn't non-binary?
19 female authors, though.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Let's just use the data that makes us look the best and say how many male authors did we read versus books by female authors. Is that consistent? Is that good for real statistics? No, but this is a book podcast.
Yes, you're right, though. We did read 2 books by Essa Hansen.
And 2 books by Tamsin Muir, although I don't think you're counting Harrow the Ninth because we haven't released that episode yet.
I'm not counting Harrow the Ninth because that will go on our 2023 stats. Because even though we did read that book for 2022, it ended up not getting released. So I am specifically counting books that we have released in the year, which is not necessarily this year the same thing as books that we read for the podcast.
I just made things so complicated, didn't I? You're welcome.
How dare you get COVID? How dare you catch the plague?
Really, though, actually. We did do better with traditionally published books versus indie books or small press.
Yeah, so this year we read 28 trad published books, 13 small press books, and 9 indie or self-pub books, versus last year it was 33 traditional books or traditionally published books, 2 small press books, and 11 indie or self-published books. So yeah, it's nice to see that become a little more equitable.
And a lot of our reading was for pretty recent releases.
Yeah, 13 of the books that we read this year were published in 2022. 10 of them were published in 2021. So that's almost half of our books.
Almost half of our books were published within a year, which is, I'd say, is fairly recent.
Well, I was going to say the last 2 years, because 2021 could have been January 2021.
Okay, but that's...
But that's still quite recent.
That's approaching much more specific math than we are doing for anything else.
But, I mean, you're right. Almost half of our reading was books that had been published within the last 2 years, which is, for me, I mean, I judge that as pretty recent.
This next stat is purely in here, I assume, to show why Terry Pratchett is an outlier and should not be considered when we're looking at averages, because we read 9 books by him.
Yes, we read 9 books by Terry Pratchett. So if we are including Terry Pratchett, he is obviously the author that we read the most of. If we are not including Terry Pratchett, the authors that we read the most of were Chris Panettiere and Essa Hansen, both of whom we read 2 books.
Yeah, that's that's kind of a big outlier, I would say.
Yes, which is why I didn't want to count Terry Pratchett, because he's
we did have a couple of repeat guests last year, which was fun.
Yeah. Specifically for book episodes, the most repeats would be Chris Panettiere, because we covered 2 of his books on the podcast, Stringers and the Phlebotomist, and he came on to talk about both of them. If we're including episodes that were not specifically about books, we also had Dan Fitzgerald on twice, once to talk about his book, The Living Waters, and once to talk about monster fucking. And we had CL Pirlo on twice as well to talk about her book Bluebird, and then also to talk about Lord of the Rings fan fiction.
It was a good year.
It was a good year. I think that's it for our stats, but it will be interesting to see how that all compares with our reading in 2023.
Well, we're still doing Discworld, so I bet Pratchett will still be our most read author.
Yes, there is no question about that. Pratchett will definitely be the author that we read the most through 2024, because I'm pretty sure that it's going to take us through 2024 to finish reading all of Discworld. It's on the calendar. Like, all of that is already on the calendar. And I think it takes us up until like September or October of 2024 before we finish our Discworld reread.
That's actually much sooner than I expected. I know when we first said that, I was like, oh God, that's an eternity away. But we've gotten to that point where I'm like, oh, hey, that's pretty soon.
Yeah, I mean, the end is in sight, kind of.
Well, something interesting that I should have thought of before we started recording would be episodes that are just us versus episodes we had guests.
Yeah, that's not something that I counted or that I made the Google Sheets document that I have count.
1 second.
It's interesting. Talking about this for this episode makes me think, oh, there are all of these other things that I want to start tracking, specifically about our statistics.
It looks like we had 27 episodes with guests.
So about half, then.
And some of those were more than one guest in the episode, so that's not number of guests.
Yeah. And that also is not specifically authors talking about their book either, because for example, we had our pod, Hannah and Laura from On Wednesdays We Read, on to talk about Wild Magic, and we had Fantasy Files on to talk about The Gunslinger and also Soul Survivor.
Well, as we said, it was a good year last year, I would say, even if it ended a little rough.
We weren't intending to have this kind of mini hiatus that we had, but that's fine.
But what would you say our goals are for next year? Just more of the same, keep doing exactly what we're doing. Everything's perfect. Nothing has to change.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to see us read more indie and small press. I mean, I know that I'm mostly in charge of the calendar, so that's all on me. The fact that we don't do that as much, but I'd like to be better about that. I'd like to have more diversity in the authors that we read, so we're not just reading straight white men.
Terry Pratchett.
Although that is, again, that's going to be considerably skewed until we finish reading Discworld. Otherwise, maybe less procrastinating, just in terms of reading and maybe editing too.
What? I have no idea what you're talking about. Yeah, no, that's a good one. I actually bought stickers and a planner, and so every day I don't procrastinate, I get a sticker. Am I 5 years old? No, because I'm mature enough to admit that I need a system. But yeah, I think our ratio, I really liked our ratio of guest episodes to just us. Guests are really fun, but I also like hanging out with you.
I really enjoy having guests on, but it also tends to be more work, just in terms of preparation and also in terms of editing. Not that I'm the one doing that, but
it's true though.
Yeah, so those require more time. And yeah, I like hanging out with you too. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing this podcast still.
I was talking to a friend who asked, "Oh, did you guys enjoy like having a break from podcasting?" I was like, "No." It was purely out of necessity. If I could choose how I spent my time, I would have definitely been doing podcasting instead of work and being sick.
Yeah, I occasionally like having a break when we've had a really busy month and like we're doing podcasting on Wednesdays and every weekend, for example. And then I like to have a break, but I like to have a planned break, not an unplanned one. But I mean, that's life. Can't control everything, despite my best attempts at the calendar.
Yeah. We've arrived at the fun part. Anyone who doesn't care about stats, sorry. You made it. And, oh, Sarah, you made this list, didn't you? Our very first superlative is for best trash villain.
I mean, it was a joint effort making the list, if I recall correctly, but I was the one who typed everything up. So, yes, best trash villain, I think that would be Threy from Essa Hansen's The Graven trilogy, but specifically in the first book of the series, which is No Fat Gloss, because in book 2, he's a little softer, I think a little less villainous. So No Fat Gloss kind of sci-fi space opera, really interesting world building. Threy, very trash villain. You're not sure whether you want him and Caden. Is Caden the main character?
I believe so. It's been a minute.
It's been a minute. No Fat Gloss, we read. Well, No Fat Gloss and the sequel, Is There a Ghost, we read at the very beginning of 2021. 2022. Yes, correct. But so you're not sure whether you want Threy and Caden to team up or make out. And that's why he's a great trash villain.
Those books are very long, but so much stuff happens in them that it absolutely makes it worth it.
Yes.
And also, we agreed on that one. So that was our answer.
Yes.
This next one, we have different answers, though. For best supporting character.
My vote for this would be the landlady in Viviana Valentine Gets Her Man by Emily Edwards, which is a historical, like, private detective novel that was a lot of fun. Or Robin, the Robin Bird sidekick in The Marauders, the Daughter, and the Dragon. So Robin is the shit-talking, cursing, sex-loving bird animal companion, and she's great.
She is great. I don't disagree with either of those, but I do have a different answer, which would be Malika from The Other Black Girl by Zakiya Delilah Harris. She is the main character's best friend, and she's not, the main focus of the book, but she is such a good friend in that book. And holy shit, some wild stuff happens.
Yeah, their friendship is excellent. And yeah, wild stuff does happen in that book.
The Other Black Girl is I would say, like, horror thriller novel that follows a Black young woman, who works in the publishing industry in New York. And I don't want to say much more than that because there are some really excellent twists. But it starts off more of like an office drama and then gets wild, is all I will say. And we read that as part of our Spooky Month series in October.
Oh, I just realized our next award or superlative is Best Hero. And your answer you can't use because
it didn't come out yet. Oh, fuck.
It didn't come out yet.
Damn it. Well, my answer was Susan from The Hogfather, but I sure did get sick when that episode was supposed to be released, didn't I?
Yes, you did. So that episode will be coming out this month in January, but it did not come out in 2022.
Well, then I think the answer has to be the main character from The Phlebotomist, but I forgot her name.
Yeah, I forgot her name too. But I would agree with you. She's a great main character. Willa. That's her name, Willa.
Excellent. Thank you.
At least I'm pretty sure that's her name. Now I'm having a paroxysm of doubt. But yeah, she is like this badass old grandmother.
It is Willa.
Yeah, okay. Phew. She's this badass old grandmother who wears a bright pink wig.
And it was so her grandson could like identify her in a crowd easier, right? Which is like the sweetest thing in the world. That book is a kind of dystopian, definitely horror elements, and Willa is just such a great main character for that. She's so competent and just such a cool lady, and also got a lot of twists in it. So we'll just say that about it.
Hard to talk about that book because it has some excellent twists.
Oh, that was also part of our Spooky Month series, wasn't it?
It was.
I think all of our Spooky Month books made it onto this list, so.
Well, we read some excellent books for Spooky Month.
That's true. Hey, speaking of Chris Panettiere, which was the best book by a new to us author, Sarah?
Well, we have both of his books down, Stringers and The Phlebotomist.
I think Stringers is a better book. I just didn't want to pick between them, but since we got Phlebotomist in there with Willa, I now feel comfortable saying it's Stringers.
Yes. I think Stringers also, I think, counts more because that was the first book of his that we read.
Yeah.
So technically, he was not a new to us author when we read The Phlebotomist.
That's true.
So I think it would be, by the strictest definition of this superlative, I think it would have to be Stringers regardless.
Both good books, but...
Yes, Stringers is sci-fi with a lot of offbeat bug facts as footnotes.
It's a science fiction adventure that starts with an abduction, so that's fun. And it's told like with a really interesting narrative style from the first person.
Also an exceptional secondary supporting character.
Yes. But again, can't talk about that, can we?
No. Okay, so we've covered best book by a new to us author, best book by a not new to us author.
Well, my answer was Ring Shout by P. Jelly Clark. Now, I know it's a novella, but I'm saying that counts.
I mean, it does count. It was published. It's in a book format. We're not talking about specific lengths, book length.
Yeah, but I can never trust you to not be pedantic just to give me shit, so.
I mean, I have to get back at you somehow for all the shit you give me.
I knew if I started the argument, you would come back with the opposite, which is where I wanted to end up anyway. We did read, oh fuck. What did we read last year?
A Master of Gin by P. Jelly Clark.
Thank you. Which was a very good book, which I probably liked it better than Ring Shout if I had to pick between those two, but that's just because it was longer. It had more time to explore the setting he was setting up. Is there a better way to say that? I don't think so. Establishing the setting he was establishing.
Yeah.
But Ring Shout was so good. And as far as books by authors we had already read, that was probably my favorite. And part of our Spooky Month series. That's a book that takes place in America's history where the KKK are actual demons.
Yeah, I really enjoyed Ring Shout. I also would say that Attack and Decay by Andrew Cartmel was a fantastic book by a not new to us author. Andrew's wonderful. He's lovely. He's been on the podcast a couple of times now. And I really enjoy his Vinyl Detective books, which are, I'd count them as cozy crime. They're not quite like detective novels, but there is some kind of detectoring.
They have to solve mysteries.
Yeah.
They're definitely mysteries because they're the kinds of books that you can try to solve while you're reading.
Yes.
There are some books where there is a mystery in the book, but I don't consider the book itself a mystery because if the answer is so off the wall that there's just no way, like, oh, really? It turns out aliens exist and it was them all along? Great. I totally could have figured that out by the fingerprints, But his books actually have like clues that you can follow and try to guess, and that's always so much fun.
Yes, and unusually for us, not a fantasy or sci-fi novel. We have a couple of those, but they tend not to make up the bulk of our reading.
Well, I think we're in agreement on the best debut novel that we read in 2022.
No Fet Glass by Essa Hansen.
Definitely. It starts with like a coming of age that's a little frustrating, but absolutely rewarding as you read through it. And then you get to the found family sci-fi adventure portion, and the world just keeps unfolding from there. Absolutely amazing book. Sequel absolutely holds up. Can't wait to read the third one.
Yes, which we will be reading for the podcast, covering on the podcast when it comes out, but that's not for until like July or something. So it'll take us a while to get there, but really excited to cover it.
We did reread a couple of books this year.
I think my favorite reread, it's got to be Inda by Sherwood Smith, which was not a reread for you, but I've read Inda a couple of times, and just the expansive world that she's created and the detail in her world building combined with the characters and the way the plot plays out. I absolutely love it. One of my favorite books of all time. Well, that series is one of my favorite books of all time. Also, special shout out to The Hobbit. That's always a fun reread.
I don't think we actually gave The Hobbit any of these awards because that's just like too easy.
Yeah. I feel like The Hobbit could basically, maybe not, there's no trash villains in it, but I think that it basically could win all of these superlatives.
We could at least make an argument for all of them.
Yes.
Also, you don't think Smaug is a trash villain? Benedict Cumberbatch would disagree.
Okay, but that's specifically the movie, not the book.
All right. My answer for this would actually be Hitchhiker's Guide because we're ignoring The Hobbit. I hadn't read that book in a really long time, and reading it as an adult gave me a very different perspective, different experience reading it. It was so much darker than I remembered. I think as a younger person, I just went, it's so funny and edgy. But reading it now, I just reacted, I don't know. It was still funny and edgy, but that edginess was much more on the horrifying edge of funny, I think.
Yeah, I think there are nuances that you either don't understand or don't necessarily comprehend when you read it as a child. And then you read it as an adult and you're like, oh, there's so much more perspective that I have now on what Douglas Adams is satirizing.
It's much, much darker, I think, reading it now than it was as a child.
Yeah.
Or, young teenager as a child.
That is a child. Best book we read not for the podcast.
You have a better answer for this than I do, so why don't I start?
That is why I asked the question.
Well, I read one book that was not for the podcast, which was Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. It probably would have won this award for me anyway, even if it did have competition.
It is an excellent book.
It was really good, but that was also the only book I could think of that I read. So I feel like I'm not doing it justice, but that's my answer. Oh, that book is such a sweet, cozy fantasy. There is definitely still conflict and loss in the book, but you spend so much of the time just rooting for the main characters and feeling for them when bad things happen and cheering for their successes. And it has a very sweet romance in it. And it has both legends and lattes. So what more could you ask for?
I think it's funny that the books that I chose are also what I would classify as cozy fantasy. The first, and I read a lot of really great books, so my answers for this probably have some recency bias, as these were books that I read, both books that I read in December. The first would be The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandana, which is just a really soft book. It is kind of like contemporary fantasy. It takes place in the real world, but witches are a thing. They're hidden. It's also a romance. Like, I would say that's a fantasy romance, maybe. Well, I don't know if fantasy romance means that it doesn't take place in in our world, but it's definitely a romance novel. And it's just, like I said, really soft. There is still conflict, but it is conflict that you feel the characters can overcome and that you would believably see in the real world. It's also not conflict caused by miscommunication, which I appreciate because that's a horrible trope in romance novels that I hate. And then the other book that I really liked was Can't Spell Treason Without Tea by Rebecca Thorne, which is very similar to Legends and Lattes. I think that's one of her comp titles, actually. But it takes place in a fantasy world. It has really, really cute established lesbian couple at the heart of it. And how can you not like a book about people who go off and build a combination tea shop and bookshop with lots of plants? I mean, it's like she wrote this for me.
Isn't that just like every high school girl's fantasy? When I grow up, I'm going to own a bookstore that also serves tea.
Yes.
Not realizing that that means being an entrepreneur, which is not the same thing as just drinking tea all day.
Yes.
And it's nice to indulge in that a little bit.
It was delightful. I mean, I feel like this was a great year for cozy fantasy.
What about the best book we did read for the podcast? This is kind of a hard question to answer.
Yes, I was going to say also a very hard question because we read so many great books for the podcast. One of my favorites was Saint Death's Daughter by C.S.E. Cooney, just because her writing was so joyful. I loved the way she played with writing. And the world was so interesting. I'm really looking forward to reading more about Lainey, this necromancer who is literally allergic to death.
It had creepy skeletons and it had some romance drama. I mean, that's it. That's everything.
It had creepy skeletons and it had cute skeletons.
Well, okay. Obviously there were cute skeletons, but I mean, when you're looking at the book, it's got the every wannabe goth's favorite things.
Yes.
Because just because the skeletons were cute doesn't mean that the addition of skeletons does not make the whole book a little bit less. It makes the book not cutesy.
Yes.
Right? Because I think if the book had unfolded where she was an animal mage and these were just sweet little field mice dancing around, that could have gotten way too saccharine. Saccharine?
I think it's a hard C.
Okay. I don't think I've ever said that word out loud.
I'm not sure I have either, but I still think it's a hard C.
Thank you. We'll go with that. But because it was mice skeletons, it just gives it a little bit of an edge. It made all of the sweetness feel nice and deserved instead of oh my God, more of this, vomit.
Yes, I agree with that. Book setting we'd most want to live in.
This is kind of a cop-out, but the answer has to be Tortall, which is the setting of Wild Magic by Tamora Pierce. That is one of the nostalgia books that we read with our pod as part of our nostalgia book club. I'm saying that it's a cop-out because it's a book for younger readers, and Tortall, the kingdom that it takes place in, is specifically just a great place to live. Unrealistically so. All of the leaders are good guys who want to do the best they can. There are no prejudices. Everyone's just nice to each other. There are villains, but they're clearly villains, and they're from somewhere else. It just seems like a really nice place to live because it's not that complicated. But yeah, that's my answer.
I think that's a good answer. I don't really have a great answer for this. I think I also would want to live in the setting of Saint Death's Daughter, just because it seemed like a really cool world building.
The magic was neat, but there's no guarantee that we'd be one of the important people in that world.
No, but I think the cities still sounded like fun to live in.
Okay. I want to give a shout out to The Marauders, the Daughter, and the Dragon by K.R.R. Lockhaven, because that was my like instinctual answer, because those islands that it takes place on just seems so cool. There's a lot of swashbuckling. There are capybaras in fancy dress, which is the best thing ever. And there are some fun like fawns and other species. But then I remembered that because of all those species, there's a speciesist political movement, and I don't really want to deal with that part. So can I live in that world after all of the politics have been dealt with? See, this is why Tortall was my answer, because it's unrealistic in that there are no problems with prejudices. Whereas Lockhaven's setting is also like this beautiful, idyllic fantasy world, but it does have real life problems.
Yeah.
And that's why I couldn't quite say that that was my answer. But if I could find like one of the fun islands that doesn't have any of that bullshit, that's where I would want to live.
Yes, I agree with that. I also want to give a shout out to the worlds in Stellar Instinct by Jonathan Nefer. I don't necessarily want to live in them because it's still a capitalist society, but they sounded really cool. All of the different planets.
Absolutely. This is also one that we can't just say The Hobbit for, because who doesn't want to live in the Shire?
Yeah.
And that's too lazy, so we're not saying it. Do you like how I didn't say it just now? You're welcome. Well, what about a place we think we'd immediately die?
So book setting, we would immediately die in. For me, easy. That's either The Temps by Andrew DeYoung or Fermi's Progress by Chris Farnell.
Well, seeing as how I did just catch our pandemic virus, The Temps, a book in which there is a zombie virus and we're following a small group of survivors who hole up in the office building where they work. Yeah, clearly I would catch it and die immediately.
Yes. Yeah, given that I have also caught the plague, I think that I would catch the zombie virus. And in Chris Farnell's book, Fermi's Progress, we follow a small group of interplanetary, I don't really want to call them explorers because they're on the spaceship, not necessarily fully of their choice.
They end up exploring.
They end up exploring. They also end up killing every planet they explore. Thus, I would die immediately because I'm not on that spaceship in the book.
Technically correct, which is the best kind of correct.
Yes.
Our next award is for the book that surprised us the most, and I think we have to give that one to The Temps by Andrew DeYoung.
I agree. I honestly was not expecting to enjoy that book as much as I did. Like, it was a fantastic book, but from the description, I was like, I'm not really feeling this. Like, it's okay, but I don't know how much I'm gonna like it. And then as we read through it, I was like, oh, this is actually really, really good and compelling.
Yeah, when we get email requests to cover books, we just have like a little blurb about it, right? And so we have to decide if the book sounds good based on a paragraph or two. And I'm glad we went for it because the description, if I remember, sounded much sillier than the book actually was. There's definitely humor in that book. There's a lot of exploration of what it's like to be a temp at a huge tech company, but in this post-apocalyptic setting, which is very funny, but it's not nearly as silly as the description we received made it sound. And it was very, very good. And I hope this is coming across as a compliment because it's supposed to be. And there have been some books that I won't name that the descriptions make them sound interesting, and then the book itself kind of falls flat. So we're not going to use that as the award for this.
No, all of these awards are supposed to be good things because, like, that's more fun to talk about, quite honestly.
Yeah, of course. It's just wild. I don't know. Would it be better if we also had like the first page so we could get a sense of the voice? Maybe. I don't know.
I mean, I think technically we can generally go onto Amazon and do preview the book.
We should probably start doing that more. But
that only works assuming the book is already out.
Right.
Yeah, we got the review request for the Temps before it had been published, so it's a little harder to judge in that case.
Yeah. And then we're trying to say whether or not we'll review it before we even know if we'd like it. And then what if we don't like it, but we already said we'd review it? What do we do then? We haven't figured this out yet.
This podcast is a work in progress.
But this is an example of when that worked out in our favor.
Yes.
We were unsure of it based on the description, but it ended up fantastic. And he was such a delight to interview.
Yeah, I really enjoyed having him on.
Sarah, what's the book or series you'd most like to be turned into a TV show or movie?
Surprising no one. That's Run with the Hunted by Jennifer Donohue. Actually, also Inda.
I was going to say.
I've already talked about Inda. So, going to talk about Run with the Hunted by Jennifer Donohue, which is what I would consider like cozy cyberpunk. It follows these three friends. Well, they start out really as coworkers, and then they kind of morph into friends by the end of the series. We've only covered the first one, but it's a series of novellas. The series is the same title as this first book. And I think it would be really fun to watch their antics as a TV show.
You always describe it as cyberpunk, which is probably not wrong for the setting, but at least for the first one, which is the only one that I've read, I don't think that describes the genre of the story that well. I think it's definitely a heist story.
It is a heist story. Yeah, when I call it cyberpunk, that is more the setting and less the genre.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, it's not cyberpunk, but I think we need to explain it a little better than that. So I did. All right.
Yeah. Thank you.
And you talk about Inda all the time. You can't like pretend that you don't really want Inda to be a TV show.
No, I mean, I would love Inda to be a TV show too. I think it deserves to be a TV show a la Game of Thrones with a huge amount of money put into it because it has that scope. And I think it would do really well there. But also, I would love to see Run with the Hunted turned into a TV show.
Well, for our last award, we have most fun episode to record. Or I guess it's favorite episode to record. Excuse me.
Yeah, favorite episode to record. I mean, kind of the same thing. Often the same thing.
Oh, we have two answers to this. And the first one has to be the Synopticon by Xueting Ni. We had her on for an interview at the beginning of last year. And she was actually the translator and editor of a series of science fiction short stories originally published in Chinese.
Yeah, and speaking with her was fantastic. I'm not super familiar with the genre of Chinese science fiction and fantasy, so she was really informative. I feel like I learned a bunch from having her on and talking to her about these stories and her process of editing and selecting them.
It kind of felt like we got to have a class just for us.
Yeah, it was great. And she's such a lovely, like, engaging podcast guest.
Oh, yeah. Just getting the chance to hang out with her for a little bit was, just, again, fun, which is why I accidentally said that this was the most fun episode to record.
And our second option, I think, would have to be our episode on monster fucking with Dan Fitzgerald. Like, that was, again, just a huge amount of fun to record that episode.
Absolute riot. We didn't have to pull any punches. Dan is always a fantastic guest and dove right into that ridiculous genre with us. He's a very good sport.
Yes.
And on that note, do we have any exciting things we're looking forward to in 2023 other than 52 more great episodes?
Yeah, well, actually 50, because we're taking the last 2 weeks off.
Like we did last year, except on purpose this time.
Except on purpose this time, yes. Because I figure, no one's going to be listening to podcasts on Christmas, and we don't want to edit podcasts around Christmas. So just easier to take the time off.
I actually absolutely do listen to podcasts on the plane. holiday travel.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean we're going to do podcasting just for you guys on the plane. Listen to an old episode. It's fine.
Yes. But things that I'm looking forward to, I mean, we are scheduled out farther than we should be, probably.
Always.
Always. Yeah. Because, guys, you just got to stop putting out so many good books each year. Like, it's not my fault that our calendar fills up. It's all your fault.
How are we supposed to catch up with the greats when there are so many new ones getting made?
Exactly. But something that I'm particularly looking forward to, we're going to be speaking with Rob Wilkins, who was Terry Pratchett's longtime personal assistant, to talk about the biography that he wrote, Terry Pratchett, A Life with Footnotes. You heard it here first, folks, because we haven't announced that anywhere, but that episode is going to be coming out in February, hopefully. And I am really, really, really looking forward to it. Also freaking out a little bit, but... Do you have anything that you're particularly looking forward to next year? This year? Gosh, what is time?
This upcoming year.
This upcoming year, yes.
I'm really looking forward to using shiny stickers to trick myself into not doing everything at the last second.
I hope it works.
Me too.
I'll believe it when I see it, but yeah. I hope it works.
Hey, I didn't procrastinate on reading. Well, not for this episode, but we do have some reviews to write after we're done recording. And I finished those yesterday.
I'm impressed.
Instead of saying, Sarah, can we push back the recording by 15 minutes? I'm almost done.
I'm impressed. You're doing great.
Thank you. So yeah, we'll see. Fingers crossed. Someday I'll be responsible.
Someday. Maybe even this year.
Perhaps. I got a whole sheet of shiny star stickers that says, I will be. And with that, I think it's time for us to actually start the year, huh?
Yeah.
Well, then I'd like to thank everyone for listening to this episode of Fiction Fans.
Come disagree with us. We're on Twitter and Instagram and various other social media platforms at FictionFansPod. You can also email us at fictionfanspod@gmail.com.
If you enjoyed this episode, or, any of the ones that we talked about, please rate and review us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And go ahead and follow us wherever your podcasts live. We're on almost all of them.
Thanks again for listening, and may your villains always be defeated. Bye.
Bye.